On July 27, 2024, Oklahoma executed a real-life monster, Richard Norman Rojem Jr., for the heinous acts against his 7-year-old ex-stepdaughter, Layla Cummings. A step-parent can bring great security, love, and protection into a home. But what happens when they are the monster hiding under the bed? Welcome to The Last Supper. Hello and welcome to episode 8 of The Last Supper, a true crime podcast. My name is Colson Davis and I'm an amateur chef, a true crime junkie, a music and video producer, and a content creator. Every episode of this podcast, I will be telling you a true death penalty case story, and at the same time, I will be cooking that criminal's last requested meal before they were executed. This week, we're looking at Richard Norman Rojem Jr., and his last meal consisted of 2 small double cheese, double pepperoni pizzas from Little Caesars and 2 cups of vanilla ice cream. You can find all the recipes I've written for this show at lastsupperpodcast.com/blog. Before we get started, make sure you're subscribed or following the show wherever you're watching or listening, and make sure you go subscribe to the email list so you're the first to know about new episodes, new content, new merch, all this stuff, all for free. Now, let's dive into the case of Richard Rojem Jr. Richard Norman Rojem Jr. was born on December 19th, 1957. He was born into a family with generational dysfunction. His parents and caretakers were all alcoholics throughout his childhood. Richard was born prematurely with an orthopedic deformity and disability. This is simply a distortion of the shape or size of the bones, which could lead to fucked up hands, feet, legs, etc. But in Richard's case, he had a painfully dislocated hip, which only made Richard's first 3 years of life possible with a full body cast. When Richard was 3, his father was killed in a bar fight. This meant Richard had to be raised solely by his mother, who was 17 years old. Yeah, she was fucking 14 years old. That is crazy, but I can't really say that much because I was 16 when I had my kids, but still, 16 is quite a leap from 14. But anyway, he grew up in a very overcrowded household that fit 13 people in 1,500 square feet. Richard saw a lot of domestic disputes and fights between his mother and his stepfather, and Richard was sexually abused by his older stepbrother. Richard had a genetic predisposition to developing psychological problems such as schizophrenia, bipolar, and other personality disorders. So no wonder this dude never made it in life. When Richard was 21 years old, he raped 2 teenage girls in Macomb County, Michigan. He was charged and convicted for 3 counts of criminal sexual conduct and 1 count of second-degree sexual conduct. He was then sentenced to 2 concurrent 6 to 15-year sentences. While in prison, he was cellmates with a man who I don't know the name of, but his cellmate had a sister, and the sister's name was Mindy Cummings. After Richard was released after a short 4-year term in prison for rape, he and Mindy got married. Mindy had 2 children, Layla and her older brother Jason. Richard was sexually violent with Mindy. No, what? Shocker, what? There's no way that this rapist, violent guy was sexually violent. But all jokes aside, that is absolutely horrible. But what did Mindy expect, honestly? This makes me wonder what kind of mental state Mindy was in, and to take in a rapist and put them around her children? And no shocker, Richard did not have a good relationship with the children either. This led to Layla Cummings, the daughter, to report Richard's violence, and Richard was sent back to prison for violating parole. After this, Mindy obtained a restraining order against Richard and filed for divorce. This was granted in May of 1984. Richard was released soon after this. In the dark of night of July 6, 1984, Richard left the bar around 11:50 p.m. Richard later called his place of work around 1:14 a.m. on July 7th and asked the dispatcher to log the time of the call at 12:35. Later that morning, Richard called again to request that the time be set to the correct time. That morning on July 7th, Layla Cummings' stabbed and brutalized body was found by a farmer in a field in Burns Flat, 15 miles away from her mother's apartment, still wearing her mother's nightgown. The farmer came no closer than 10 feet. Police were called and arrived on scene. There they found footprints that were undistinguishable and tire tracks leading from the country road into the field and then leaving. They also found part of a condom wrapper. The police suspected Richard and searched his house later July 7th. In his bedroom, they found a used condom in the garbage, along with other parts of the condom wrapper. The other piece of the wrapper matched the one found at the crime scene, and the condom was also found to match the ones available to buy in the men's bathroom at the bar Richard was at that night. The police interrogated Richard about his whereabouts, and he said he left the bar when it closed, drove to the Burns Flat Superette supermarket, 24.7 miles from the bar, and arrived around 1:10 a.m. He said he stopped by his girlfriend's house in Dill City, Oklahoma before heading home. Police weren't believing any of it though, and they were able to find enough evidence to arrest Richard. So after the bar, and before calling his work, Richard abducted young Layla from her apartment in Elk City, Oklahoma, that Mindy, Layla, and her brother were living at. A beer cup that matched the cups at the bar were found with Richard's fingerprints on it outside the building. Mindy was working a night shift at McDonald's that night, and Richard was told Mindy's work schedule and that Mindy's door lock was broken by a family member. Mindy was notified by the individual who was watching the apartment from across the street that Layla was missing. Richard entered the house and coerced Layla into coming with him. He then drove Layla 15 minutes away to the field in Burns Flat. Oh, now this is fucking disgusting and brutal, so skip ahead a minute if you don't want to hear any autopsy details. The medical examiner testified in court that Layla had 2 large stab wounds to her neck area, which severed a major artery and pierced a lung. She was also stabbed in her vaginal region and suffered other rape-caused injuries to her vaginal and rectal area. These injuries included bruising, lacerations to the hymen and vaginal walls, and fingernail gouges to the buttocks, which indicated forced rape. There was no sperm found in or on the body. Fuck, dude. Fucking disgusting, dude. What the actual fuck is wrong with people? God damn it. There was footprints in the soil around Layla's body, but they were indistinguishable. But the tire tracks at the scene did end up matching to Richard's truck. The tire tracks showed that someone drove a vehicle into the field from the county road with 2 tires with 7 ribs each on the rear, a tire on the front left which only had 6 ribs, and a bald tire on the front right. The tires were compatible with tires on Richard's truck, except for the front right tire, the bald tire. However, there was evidence that the right front tire had been changed, possibly as recent as the day of the murder, after they found the condom wrapper that linked Richard to the scene as well. Richard was being held at Beckham County Jail, and on July 28, 1984, Richard was charged with the kidnapping, rape, and murder of Layla Cummings. The prosecutors were seeking the death penalty. So I forgot to add this part, but Mindy and Richard were actually going to try to reconcile the relationship before the murder, and I have no clue why Richard just went and did this afterwards, but who knows? That was something I forgot to add, that they were going to try to reconcile. So on July 1st, 1985, Richard stood trial. At the trial, Mindy Cummings discussed the terms of her and Richard's reconciliation, which included no talk of Christianity in the home, Richard be able to smoke pot and drink alcohol, and that he be allowed to fool around with other women as long as he not bring it home. Mindy described their sexual activity as violent, leaving behind fingerprint bruises on her bottom, and that he didn't use condoms. A second witness, LaDonna Broderick, testified that her and Richard never used condoms either. And a third woman, Teresa Spake, that they didn't use condoms either, and that Richard asked her to shave her pubic hair because he stated his sex life began at a young age, referring to his older brother's abuse. The defense objected to Spake discussing the relations and later asked for a mistrial. Richard was convicted of the crimes in the District Court of Washita County by Judge Paul C. Bruin. I don't fucking know. What the hell? You get the point. He was sentenced to death for the murder and 1,000 years each for the kidnapping and the rape convictions. And if only he got 1,000 years the first time he raped a minor, but no, you can't fucking do that for some reason. God, this case pisses me off. Before the trial, Richard taunted the family with conspiracy theories and pleas of innocence. He started targeting Layla's father, Don. Mindy Cummings wrote, quote, "He taunted Don with accusations that he had failed to protect his daughter, and this was therefore his fault." After the first trial concluded, Don sadly committed suicide in Michigan. He wrote a note that said, quote, "Maybe now I can rest." Mindy made a statement saying, quote, "Today we also honor the memory of Layla and Jason's father, Don Cummings, who is not with us today due to the absolute evil or a monster who purposely tormented him to the brink of despair that ended his life." Vicky Cummings, Layla's aunt, later stated at a parole hearing, quote, "Only 14 months had passed since he, Don, and I stood by the tiny white casket of his 7-year-old daughter. I beg of you, feel his pain." Now, Richard appealed and contended that there was insufficient evidence that penetration occurred to support his rape conviction. What the fuck? I hate this shit so much. This monster knew in his head he violated that poor girl, and the balls on this man to try to legally maneuver out of it is fucking disgusting. I hate this case so much, and I want to say something real quick. I have kids of my own, and this broke my heart to hear. This is the first case of this podcast that I've done that's made me cry. I cried whenever I had to read the medical examiner's details of the body. It broke my fucking heart. This is absolutely fucking disgusting. I hate this man so much. Yeah, so there's my rant there. God damn it. He argued that the medical examiner could not state definitely that penetration occurred. Therefore, the circumstantial evidence, quote, "of some sexual activity in the vicinity," the condom wrapper, "does not establish that there was requisite penetration." But a witness can't say for sure that something happened, especially the medical examiner. They are there to present their findings and tell what the body had suffered, and they can infer what happened based on the injuries, but can't say, quote, "This is exactly what happened and I know it." Make sense? All right, so Oklahoma law requires that actual penetration is required for a rape charge, however, that any sexual penetration, however slight, supports a rape conviction. So that can mean an object like fingers, not necessarily a penis. But in Richard's case, the medical examiner testified that Layla's hymen, labia major and minor, and vaginal walls were bruised. It was Dr. Chow's opinion that the bruising resulted from a blunt force trauma to the hymen, which was consistent with being caused by a male penis. She also stated the injuries were inflicted while the victim was still alive. They clearly rejected that bullshit, disgusting argument. Fuck off, Richard. Now, Richard contends the kidnapping charges argued that there was no evidence that the victim was ever held without her will, and that she went willfully with Richard. He argued further that he knew Layla since his marriage was with her mother, Mindy. There was no evidence of a struggle to support the kidnapping conviction. However, just because there wasn't a struggle doesn't negate the conviction. Quote, "A child of tender years is ordinarily regarded as incapable of consenting to its seizure and abduction, and when taken from its rightful guardian is deemed to have been taken without its consent as a matter of law." They rejected that as well. There's also some bullshit with the jury that said due to her belief she couldn't give the death penalty, but when they questioned further and gave an example case, she said she might be able to. It wasn't that significant to change the outcomes of the trial and would have more likely helped Richard more. Now, there's more stuff in the appeals with a change of venue because of newspapers written about him years prior for his first rape conviction, lack of funds for his own expert testimony, excluding people over 70 from being a jury, blah, 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 blah. So those were all rejected. However, on March 31st, 2001, the 10th U.S. Circuit of Appeals unanimously overturned his sentencing. The court ruled that the trial judge violated his constitutional rights. The judge didn't ask the jury to consider the mitigating circumstances when looking at the aggravating circumstances. They ordered a resentencing, and the prosecution sought the death penalty again. Even though Richard was granted new DNA testing, he was resentenced to death in 2003. 3 years later, in 2006, Richard's sentencing was overturned again due to issues with the sentencing jury. He was once again sentenced to death. Imagine you're sentenced to death 3 times. That is clearly stating how much of a piece of shit you are. After appealing his third death sentence, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals rejected his pleas. There were some errors in the 2007 sentencing, they admitted, but stated the death sentence was, quote, factually substantiated and appropriate. Amen. And finally, in 2010, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected his appeals and affirmed his death sentence. Richard continued to fight the case until all his appeals were eventually exhausted in 2017, when the U.S. Supreme Court denied to hear his case. Jack Fisher, Richard's defense attorney, stated, quote, "There's nothing else really we can do. He's ready to just go on." Now, if you watched a couple episodes ago, this might ring a bell. So in 2015, Oklahoma was the first state to authorize executions by nitrogen hypoxia should the lethal injections be declared unconstitutional or unavailable. And coming into 2016, the death penalty was put on pause due to issues with the lethal injection process. This came about because of the execution of Charles Frederick Warner. It was found that Frederick was given the wrong drugs after his execution on February 15, 2015. In 2018, the state announced their plans to switch its method completely to nitrogen hypoxia asphyxiation. However, in 2020, the state announced to resume using the 3-drug lethal injection method. The first execution after the reinstatement was described as botched. Media witnesses reported the inmate repeatedly convulsing and vomiting. This was the execution of John Grant. Autopsies show that he suffered pulmonary edema and intramuscular hemorrhaging throughout his execution, eventually aspirating on his vomit as a result of the lethal injection process. The autopsy describes there was a quick buildup of fluids in his lungs that creates a feeling of suffocation or drowning that experts have likened to waterboarding. In prison, Richard became a Zen Buddhist and was highly respected by his Zen Buddhist friends. He was known by other followers as Daiji, according to his attorneys, which I don't understand because the word Daiji has so many different meanings. First off, it translates to important in Japanese. Second, it was once a Japanese-era name from the year 1126. Then it's also a set of Japanese numbers. These sets are used in legal and financial documents to prevent fraud, since the normal sets of numerals were basic. The Daiji number set is more complex, so a person can't add an extra dash to make a 1 into a 2 or a 3, for example. Anyways, I don't understand how the hell this relates to Richard being a Daiji. Maybe because he's important in Japanese? I don't really know. Anyways, I tried to figure it out, but there's your Japanese culture info of the week, which I still think is pretty cool. I've gotten back into anime again, and Sword Art Online is where I started back up, so leave any recommendations down in the comments of what I should watch next. I'll engage with everybody in the comments. So, the week before Richard's execution was set, he filed for clemency. Richard at the hearing stated, quote, "I did not murder Layla." However, he never denied his involvement in earlier wrongdoings, like raping 2 teenage girls in 1978. Concerning this, a handcuffed Richard said, quote, "I wasn't a good human being for the first part of my life, and I don't deny that. But I went to prison, I learned my lesson, and I left all that behind." Jack Fisher, Richard's attorney, told the Pardon and Parole Board that Richard didn't receive a fair trial from the beginning in 1985, and that Richard was now a Zen Buddhist and would not, quote, "be a threat to anybody." However, Mindy Cummings had some different thoughts. Quote, "Everything she might have been was stolen from her one horrific night. She never got to be more than the precious 7-year-old that she was, and so she remains in our hearts forever 7. Layla's Aunt Vicky said she waited 40 long years to see Richard die. Quote, "I've become weary all these years pressing against that prison door trying to keep him in, having to relive this horror time and time again." After this, the Pardon Parole Board took less than a minute to unanimously deny Richard's clemency 5-0. That's right. Fuck off, Richard. Fuck off, you piece of shit. Oklahoma Attorney General Gentner Drummond said in a news release, quote, "I am pleased the Pardon and Parole Board denied clemency for the monster who savagely raped and murdered an innocent child and caused unimaginable suffering for her family. Justice for Layla will be served when he is executed on June 27th. Her killer is a real-life monster who deserves the same absence of mercy he showed to the child he savagely murdered. The family of Layla Cummings has wanted 40 years for justice to be done. Jack Fisher said the Parole and Pardon Board had the open to let him stay in prison the rest of his life, but, quote, you can see the fire in the eyes of the parole board. Fisher went on to say, quote, he should not be executed for this horrific crime he did not commit. He will not be a threat to anybody. On July 27th, 2024, Richard, age 66, was prepped and taken into the execution chamber, and his last words were, quote, I've said my goodbyes. The drug started flowing at 11:03 a.m. Richard had a spiritual advisor who was a Buddhist monk, Reverend Master Daishi Yalan. God damn with these names this week. What the hell? He stood at Richard's feet during the execution. They exchanged words twice before Richard fell unconscious. He was pronounced dead at 10:16. Richard was the longest serving death row inmate in Oklahoma, 40 years, and his last meal was 2 small double cheese, double pepperoni pizzas from Little Caesars and 2 cups of vanilla ice cream. He was the second man executed in the state of Oklahoma this year, and also the 9th person executed in the U.S. this year. Richard was executed a day after a man was executed in Texas. Richard was the 13th inmate to be executed since the state reinstated capital punishment in October of 2021. Mindy Cummings, who watched from the witness room, said, quote, we are grateful today for justice served and the peace of knowing that Richard Rojem could never hurt us or any other person. All right, and a couple of things before we dive in and try this delicious last meal. First, I want to shout out my new Patreon members, Mariah Lynn and Obsidian Paladin. Thank you guys for joining the Patreon. It really helps out the show. These guys just won the exclusive Halloween hoodie giveaway that I did last month. So if you don't want to miss anything else like this, make sure you're subscribed and following all of the social media platforms. Next, another great way to support the show is go and buy some merch over at lastsupperpodcast.com/merch. I just redesigned some of the merch with new designs, new colorways, all kinds of great stuff. And soon I will be having some Christmas themed merch coming out. Oh, it's going to be really good. And right now through Christmas, you can get 20% off your order with code Christmas20. And one more thing, you can now go stream the podcast over on Rumble. Rumble is an amazing platform to support because they are fighting against censorship. So in case YouTube or any platform decides to take down one of my episodes, you know where to find it. And with that, Richard Rojem's sentence was served. All right, and that concludes the case of Richard Norman Rojem Jr. This one was absolutely fucking disgusting. I hate this man so much. I'm so glad he's dead because fuck that dude. How can you do that to somebody, especially a child? What the fuck is wrong with you? This was the worst case I've researched ever. And it was pretty fucking brutal. That's really all I have to say. I don't want to keep talking about this dude. This meal looks fucking amazing. Holy fuck, look at that. Beautiful garlicky crust, stuffed crust cheese pizza. God damn, this looks so fucking good. And we're gonna jump into it right now. Let's eat. Wow, my pizza cutting skills are clearly not on point there. Holy fucking shit. Oh my God, Jesus. Look at that shit right there. That is fucking hot. Let's start with the cool down one. I don't want to start with this one because the fresh one looks great, but let's try a little cut of this so we can try this and get on our way here. A little more cool down so I can try it. Cheers. Holy shit. Oh my God. Holy fuck. This is by far one of the best homemade pizzas I've ever made in my life. This is so good. Let's try that crust, the stuffed crust. Oh yeah. Oh fucking yeah. Holy shit. Jesus Christ, this is good. Oh my God. Oh my God. When you get to that stuffed crust, it's literally like pizza, like this cheese-filled garlic stick on the end. Holy shit. Oh, my mind's about to explode. That's so fucking good. Jesus Christ, look at that thing. Oh my God. But I'll eat that after, so I don't keep everybody here forever. Let's dive into this ice cream. Oh my God. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. This is the best homemade ice cream I've ever made. Best homemade pizza, best homemade ice cream. Fuck, what a good meal. Holy fuck. Oh my God. All right, you know what I'm about to go do? Eat the rest of this food, you know it. And if you want to cook this meal for yourself, which I hope you do because it is so fucking delicious, you can do so at lastsupperpodcast.com/blog. All right, and that concludes this episode of The Last Supper, a true crime podcast. Thank you for joining us. Wherever you're watching or listening, please make sure you follow it and subscribe to the show. Also, give a 5-star review. That really helps. Let's get the show up the chart. And also, spread the words. Tell your friends, tell your family. And until then, make sure you enjoy every meal because you never know when it'll be your last.